Okay, number 13, down to the last three of the first part. Although Margaret Mead had several assistants during her long investigations of Samoa, the bulk of her research was done by alone. Okay, so they are just testing you on this very little structure at the end. The rest of this sentence is really not a factor. This is a big subordinate clause to start the sentence, and the main clause right here. Let's look at the vocabulary. We have, well, Margaret Mead's a person, assistants are helpers. Samoa, there it is, it's a place, got a capital S. The bulk of her research, the bulk just means the majority of her research. And then was done, we have a passive voice by, and here it is, the very end. Herself alone, she alone, her alone, and hers alone. Now let's go through and eliminate as many of these as possible before we select our answer. Remember, this is a preposition. So be is out. This is a subject pronoun. You can't use a subject pronoun right after a preposition. So we're down to A, C, and D. Now D, hers. Remember, hers is a possessive pronoun. It's generally without any kind of noun or any kind of anything added to it. It's like I have mine and she has hers. That's usually the end of it, so D's probably out. So we're faced with a problem of A and C. And put them here on our little example. The bulk of her research was done by her alone. That is actually the correct choice. Some native speakers might argue that this one's correct. The bulk of her research was done by herself alone. But herself, all by itself, means her alone. So it would be redundant to say by herself alone. So it's either by her alone or by herself, but not by herself alone. So it is going to be choice C on this one. The bulk of the research was done by her alone. It's choice C. That was a little bit, that could cause some confusion. They throw all the different pronouns and possibilities in there just to make you stop and get confused. All right, let's go to 14. War correspondent. We have a comma here. This is important. Hemingway used his experience for some of his most powerful novels. All right, so let's take a look at this sentence. We have Hemingway, who is a person, this capital H, so we don't really have to know exactly who that is. We just need to know that's a person. Hemingway used his experience for some of his most powerful novels. If you look at this closely, you can tell that this is the main clause. You can say this all by itself without any assistance. Hemingway used his experience for some of his most powerful novels. So that means we are working on some sort of a subordinate clause. So let's go through the answer choices. A, but a war correspondent. But a war correspondent. I think we're going to need a verb for that. But a war correspondent is something, something, something. Yeah, A is out. It's not going to work here. Let's take a look at B. It is a war correspondent. Now that should immediately, for two reasons, that should immediately make this answer wrong. First of all, just putting it is a war correspondent is implying that war correspondent is a thing and Hemingway is a person. We definitely know Hemingway is a person because we have his, going with Hemingway, that's a person, but this subordinate clause must refer directly to whoever this is or whatever this is. This is definitely a person, so it is going to immediately make B wrong. And also, it is a war correspondent, makes a main clause. We'd have two main clauses and no connector. So B is out. Let's go to C. While war correspondent. Oh, that's while war correspondent. But take a minute to think about that. War correspondent it's a person. It's actually a profession. And remember, in English with professions, we always use the article. We always use the article. So actually C is out because we need the article while a war correspondent. So let's go to D. A war correspondent, and that's actually the correct answer. It's a completely reduced subordinate clause is what that is. And let me show you two examples that would have worked. Let's look at the first example. While a war correspondent would have worked. Hemingway used his experience for some of his most powerful novels. But they didn't give you that. They gave you something close. They gave you while, but they got rid of the article. And that's what made that one wrong. So you be careful about those articles. In our second example, it's a little bit more expanded. It actually has the verb while being a war correspondent. Hemingway used his experience for some of his most powerful novels. That would have worked as well. They didn't even give you anything close to that. And you may have been confused by D, a war correspondent. How can that be a clause? But it's actually a fully reduced subordinate clause, meaning you get rid of the subordinate clause marker and you get rid of any verbs associated with them. You can only do that though typically with a be verb. If it's an action verb, it's difficult to eliminate the verb because then you lose too much of the meaning of the sentence. So so they did that. They completely reduced the subordinate clause. And if you can recognize reduced subordinate clauses, you will earn a lot of extra points because they tend to mix them into the answers. Another thing to note, remember that but, I said, oh, but's going to create a main clause. Typically, in order to have two main clauses in a sentence, you have to have one of these in the middle. And, but, or this semicolon. And sometimes they use those in the TOEFL examples. A semicolon is kind of just a substitute for the word and. So, it would have to have been like some main clause, like he was a war correspondent and Hemingway, something along those lines. In order to have this be a main clause, this would have had to have been and, but, or the semicolon. Just to play devil's advocate, I had to show you that. But anyhow, this one's choice D. This is a completely reduced subordinate clause. It's very common to do that with the names of professions. Okay. So now we're moving on to our final example. Example 15 here. Just get it to cooperate with me. All right, here we go. Final example of the first part of the structure section. 38 national sites are known as parks. Another 82 as monuments, and then we have some choices again that are they look a little bit like the same size. They are definitely playing with us with some word order. Look where the numbers are. They've moved the numbers around. They got them in the front. In the middle here of this one, they put the number at the back. So this might be one of those situations where you might just have to read through the answers. And hopefully you've recognized what they're testing for here. 38 national sites. Sites are just places. 38 national places. Sites are known as parks, comma, another 82 as monuments, comma, and look at that, we have number and then the place, number and then the place with another and a number and the place. So that's probably the structure. Let's take a look at A. The, another. Alright, okay, we don't even have to read the rest of this. Remember, you can never put the in front of another because the an is already the determiner. So then we'd have two determiners, and that would be incorrect. So we don't even have to mess around with the rest of A. Let's take a look at B. Let's take a look at B. The other 180 or 178 as historical sites. Let's see, another, the other 82, 178 monuments as historical sites, or as this is matching. Check it out. This is parallel. This is all this is. It's parallel structure. You really didn't even have to know what monuments were necessarily or historical sites. Just look at the pattern. Another, the other, number 82, 178 as monuments, as historical sites. It's choice B. It's just parallel structure. C and D, they've just switched the words around, but they're not parallel. They don't work here. You got to make it so that they are nice and parallel. That's how they like it on the TOEFL test when they're testing you for parallel structure. So this one is choice B. So sometimes just pattern matching will get you through to the answer without necessarily knowing every word perfectly. So anyhow, that's the end of the 15, the first 15. We will move on in the next video to answers 16 through 40, where we are going to then find the mistakes instead of finding the correct answer. We'll see you in the next video.